Hello and welcome to episode 73 of the official EstablishedRun.com podcast. My name is Adam Levitan. I'm one of the co-founders here at ETR. As always, I am joined by fellow co-founder, the Lord of the Top 150, Evan Silva. And today we have a very, very special guest, a guest near and dear to Evan and I's hearts. This is a young man formerly of Rotoworld, formerly of Pro Football Talk. He's boys actually with one of the sickest humans on earth, which we'll get to, Anthony Jeselnik. He's currently with the mothership at NFL.com. It is, of course, Gregg Rosenthal. Greg, thanks for being here. What's going on?
I'm so excited right now. I mean, I'm a big time listener, you know, the team by team breakdowns during the season and the off season. You're losing me a little bit with like the stock market talk this off season, but that's fine. You don't have to listen to every episode.
You're not grinding the stock market these days. Everybody.
I actually have sort of been paying attention.
Exactly.
My dad was that was his business. Well, he like lost his job in manufacturing in his 40s and then got into being a financial analyst. So yeah, I follow it, but I don't need to listen to you talking about it.
Well, you're aware that I confirmed with Strasser that financial analyst is just like code for gambling on stocks instead of gambling on football. I mean, it's the same thing.
I totally buy that. I feel like sports is harder. That's the only thing.
He said that. Yeah, he said that. Yeah. Evan, our Lord and Savior, Gregg Rosenthal is here. What's going on?
Stop.
What's going on, man? Yeah, I mean, it's been incredible to watch, Gregg rise. I mean, just, he used to be just drilling me all the time about all the mistakes that I was making in the Rotoworld not so long ago over AOL Instant Messenger.
It's like a decade ago. It was so long ago.
And to see him now on TV, it's pretty cool. But yeah, we haven't really done this. I mean, RotoViz did a great kind of history on the background of Rotoworld, which is an excellent podcast if anybody's interested in that topic still. But we haven't really had a chance to sit down with Gregg and interview him yet on ETR. I've gone on his podcast a couple of times to preview the fantasy seasons, I think the past 3 or 4 years. But yeah, this is a great opportunity. I can't wait to pick his brain and get smarter. Just listen to Gregg talk and get smarter.
Please. I mean, you guys are the ones with your own company. You don't want me for football advice or talk anymore. You just want to do some navel gazing and talk about like how you came up in the business. I love this though, because I had not seen what Levitan was working with up top in a while. And I was kind of curious, and even now we're on video and he's got like the hat on, but I had to ask him before the show what's going on. And he's coming home.
Yeah.
And I respect it. I just want to see it,
Oh, I mean, I'm disgusting. Everybody knows that, but they keep telling me to
looks
change.
Looks good on you. I think it looks good on you. I mean, like Wes is a beautiful bald man. Our friend Chris Wessling. Sometimes it works, right. Fighting it is the problem.
Exactly. Fighting it is the problem. 100%. Classic horseshoe pattern, as Constanza would say, is a major problem. Okay. Eventually we want to get into how Gregg made the greatest single move of his life, hiring both Evan and I at Rotoworld. But first, I don't even know if I ever even asked Gregg exactly how he got into fantasy, quote unquote, news, because I mean, people don't realize like back then there was like no Twitter. When I first started Rotoworld, there was no Twitter. There was no real fantasy news sites. There was like maybe 3 or 4 people. Gregg was one of them who had a full-time job in fantasy. It's just changed so much since then. So how do you even get into this in the first place, Gregg?
I sort of fell into it. I worked in like TV production for a couple years after college and was doing some stuff with Fox Sports for the NFL and MLB on the weekends. And that's where at 24, 25, it finally hit me like, why am I not trying to just work in sports full time? I was like writing copy for highlights. But like when I got the Rotoworld job, it was literally just from a help wanted thing they put on their website that a friend of mine who was a Rotoworld fan, and I knew Rotoworld then because I played fantasy from high school on, but he knew I was looking for work. At the time I was teaching tennis. I mean, I was bumming around not knowing what was going to happen, and they literally just had a help wanted job for a full-time football writer position, which you're right. I think in terms of like focusing on one sport, there couldn't have been I don't know if there were like more than a couple full-time jobs in the entire country that weren't guys who just owned their own business. There was John Hansen, like fantasy guru. There was fantasy, there was KFFL, there was football guys. And so those guys who owned it, but in terms of just like being an employee making $500 a week or whatever I was making, like there were only a couple of those jobs. And Rotoworld itself was part of like this company, All Star Stats. They had 15, 16 employees, but there was only 2 writers, and I was the second one. You know, it was Matthew Poliat, just writing every blurb for every sport. That was what Rotoworld was at the time.
Evan, I'm curious how I remember how I came across Rotoworld. Do you remember how you even found Rotoworld in the first place?
Yeah, I read Rotoworld throughout college, and I just, I would go to the library, and instead of studying, I would just go on Rotoworld, and check all my fantasy teams, and make sure that they were all updated and read all the blurbs. And I just love the website. And my plan was to go to law school out of college, but I just I took the LSAT and everything, took a course, and I just decided that I did not want to have to go to school, like walk to class at 8 o'clock in the morning. I'd never want to do that again. So, I started trying to get like a little creative. I was working construction at the time, right out of college, and contacted Gregg. I had like throughout the years, I had written a lot of stuff, just like projecting seasons, whether it be NBA or like I would do these like books every summer. And I think I sent him a bunch of that. He probably didn't even read any of it. And I
think I read some. I remember this.
I think I kind of wore him down, and with emails, and told him I would work for free, and eventually they started paying me, and and then NBC bought Rotoworld, and Gregg moved up, and I sort of moved up in his in his path, and that's kind of how we got to this spot.
Yeah, I remember reading Rotoworld for the first time, and I don't know who was writing these blurs, but I was like, holy shit, this is exactly what I've been looking for. Like, give me the news and a little bit of insight on it. And just didn't exist at the time. It's so hard to think about now, like that didn't exist, because everybody with a Twitter account or a blog or whatever has the same thing now. Take the news and put a fantasy spin on it. But at the time, it just like didn't exist, and it was so much better than whoever else was out there, KFFL or whatever else was out there. So yeah, I just remember it being like that. And I was writing, I don't know if Gregg remembers, I was writing like for my friend Jordan Ronan, who now covers the Giants for ESPN. He let me write some fantasy articles for Metro newspaper, which is like a free daily, which like homeless people sleep on and nobody reads. And I sent some of those to Gregg, and I sent a begging email too. But yeah, it's just crazy.
I remember, I probably remember wrong, but I thought I remember reading it myself. I did read the Metro here and there because I lived in New York City, and they just stick it in your hands as you're walking in.
Right.
Sometimes you're just bored enough to flip through it. And I do remember a fantasy section. Maybe you did send it to me, but then I started like looking for it, and Levitan he was like editing and writing an entire like 1-page fantasy section. Like that was the best resume possible. That was the only way I got the job at Rotoworld too. Like apparently my interview didn't go well, and they were going to hire someone else, but then I kind of felt it, and I got home, and I was like, that night I just sent them like a content plan of what I would do, which I should have probably come to the interview with, but like I was like, oh shoot, and I sent them like a huge content plan of what I would do for the entire year, and they said that's what did it. And you're right, like there wasn't anything out there then. That was 2003 when I started there, but like they didn't even know what they had. They stumbled into it. They were doing it as like an added bonus for the people who were paying for fantasy stats from their fantasy stats service, that they could have like a little 1-line write-up initially that was like getting mailed out to people, and then eventually was like on the internet when you could sign up for that. And like they had no idea what they had, and then suddenly they were selling it to NBC. Like they went from, not being able to pay the Christmas checks or putting those on credit cards, they told me, to like a year later selling it to NBC for millions and millions of dollars.
Right.
It's a dream.
No, it's
One
amazing.
thing that really stuck out to me when I was reading Rotoworld was that, up top you would have just the facts, right? And then below you would have the spin, and the spin was very often like predictive. like talking about things. Oh, he's probably going to come down to earth. Oh, he's playing well above his head right now. He's got 4 touchdowns in 3 games. He's likely to regress to some extent. And nobody else was really doing that. Like, you could go find facts about players. You could read box scores, but they were approaching it. Rotoworld was approaching it with a predictive spin. And I just thought that was really, really cool. And of course, that's nothing nowadays, right? But back in,
Right.
like, the 2000s, when did I go to college? 2001 or 2005 or 2006. Like, I just thought that was incredible.
And it was all Pouliot. It really was Matthew Pouliot, who we all owe our jobs to, because like Rotoworld would not have happened. He still does the baseball there for our listeners that aren't familiar, but he was pounding out blurbs all day, every day on like every sport. And he was putting, especially in baseball, which was his specialty. He was so happy to get rid of football, but like, he was putting that analysis. And I had been reading Rotoworld forever. And when I realized it was just like one guy in Florida doing it that like never leaves his room, it's like that sort of set the tempo of like what you're going to have to do if you work at Rotoworld.
It sounds like you got the job when you were pretty young, and then they like put you in charge of hiring like right away. Like, I never had an interview or anything. Like, I just emailed with you. You never met me. Nothing like that. You were just like in charge of hiring right away. I mean, is that how it went?
Yeah, I was 25. I realized, first of all, like Evan, kind of realizing he didn't want to go to school. And once I had the job for like 1 or 2 days, and football was not my number one sport. Baseball was at the time, and football was probably third. I knew I like was just going to take a crash course and getting to know it. And then B, I was like, I'm going to hold on to this profession forever, like, or as long as I can, until they like pry it out of my hands, because it's so much fun. And like doing that just as a job, I had done enough normal jobs to know I was super lucky. And then I also realized like 2 or 3 weeks later, and I asked someone at the company, I was like, oh, no one's going to tell me anything or even talk to me. They never told me anything really. They were just like, hey, do the football section and do the magazines. And, but that was cool. I was pumped for that. And then the numbers, which Matthew Berry definitely helped. He was there before I was like writing columns, and just the player news, the demand suddenly just started going up. And so they would let me do whatever, as long as it wasn't too expensive. Like, they pretty much just stayed out of my way. They weren't even paying any attention to me.
Right. Not sure that much has changed. I'm curious what your first impression was of Evan. How did you come across Evan's emails, and what was your first impression of his work and all that?
I have a bad memory, but I just remember him. He used the right words. He wore me down. He just kept coming at me with emails and stuff. And the hardest thing to find in that job were good, like, people who could just write right off the bat. And Wes was good at that, like, where he knew the sport and he knew how to write right off the bat. Silva clearly knew the sport and had the passion, but he wasn't as clean a writer, like, right off the bat. He was sending me all these like, previews and blurbs he did. And, I was just like, okay. But he just kept bugging me. It's a good lesson for people, because I don't know what made an impression. Yeah, he said he started working for free. So that now I feel regrets about just about everything. I was such a jerk to Silva for
No,
like
man, I don't feel any regret at all about working at all.
But it is, you get older and you realize I didn't know what I was doing, being a boss or like trying to set this up. And I had this idea of what the site was going to be. And Silva, the thing with him, man, he just, first he kept coming at me. And then once he did get a chance, it was just clear he had the work ethic that like nobody has. And like, of course that's more valuable than anything. And he knew, he loved football and he knew the sport. So the other stuff, he could work on. And he didn't, probably part of it was he didn't take stuff personally, because I had my opinions about how the job should be done, and about players too, about like, what's stupid in terms of like how you're ranking players. And, he probably hated me sometimes, but he always just kind of took it.
I did. I mean, we argued a lot. Like, we really did. I mean, sometimes.
Right. I look back to that now. I thought everyone argued like that. I guess I'm just argumentative because I don't take it personally. When we were arguing about players, and that's all we did was argue about players on I Am Forever, like, I would get so pissed. There were some times I'd be like, F that Silva guy. Like, I'm going to get rid of him. And my wife was like, do not. that you've wanted a guy like that that works like crazy and makes your life easier forever. Do not ever get rid of him. So you kind of have Emeka to thank for that.
Yeah, when I got there, it seemed like you were kind of over blurbing and you wanted to get out of the blurbing game. And I was like, yeah, I'll write some articles. And you were like, well, maybe we can write some articles down the line, but for now, I just need someone to come in and blurb. And I was like, fine. So, it seems like as people move up, I still like kind of to blurb in my own way of things I think is important. I don't want to blurb about offensive linemen and stuff like that anymore, but I do find it interesting to like grind the news still. But it seemed like you were trying to get out of the blurb stuff.
That's like the best practice I ever could have had, because when we started doing it, we were reading every newspaper every morning. I'll never know the sport as well as then, because not only was I watching every game, but I was reading every single beat writer every day. I mean, what could be better than that? And as a boss, though, it was harder to find people that were good at a lot of people can write an article, but the blurbs is like where the money was at for Rotoworld, and it was the place where it was like harder to find people. And you were, you were clearly super smart and versatile, right off the top. Silva tried to like talk trash on you. I remember.
Well, you know what?
I was like, this guy's not really like a football guy. He doesn't. I don't like it that he likes basketball and other sports too. Like, we need real hardcore football. And I was like, just calm down. It's amazing that he can write multiple sports. It's good.
Yeah. No, there's no doubt about that. And Rotopat could write multiple sports too. He could do baseball.
Yeah.
But yeah, I didn't get it then. But you can talk, Greg.
The thing is, people don't want to hear it. Like when I say it, they like laugh, but like I'm not that into football. I'm into gambling on football. So there's like a big difference. You know what I mean? So like when I'm looking for information, I'm looking for information that fantasy players can use, period. Like that's it. So like I remember like one time I did like a blurb on like a punter or like an offensive lineman or something. And like I referred to like one of his teams as his old teams as like the wrong team. And Silva had like a heart attack. And I was like, man, I don't care where this punter previously played. Like, that's not gonna help me win money. So like, I think like I was in it for trying to find the information that would help people win money. I'm not in it to learn more about football. Like, I just don't care that much about football. I care about trying to win money, which is probably a bad state of our society as a whole. But that's just the way I feel and felt.
But isn't there a balance? There is some balance.
There's tons of overlap, right?
You need the Silvas of the world or the other, different analysts to sort of like, but you were smart enough that you knew you didn't have to be that guy, that it doesn't all have to be, not just numbers and transactions and looking for edges in the market, but also like, the watching the football information that helps, but that's just part of it. But you don't have to be that guy. I think not everyone understands that like everyone can play their own different role.
For sure. So not long after, well, I guess it was kind of long after, maybe a few years after I got there, maybe, 4 years after I haven't got there. I don't know exactly. Greg started to get pulled away by Florio to PFT and became his big shot at PFT. Did you have regrets? Did you have a sad feeling about leaving us behind at Rotoworld? It seemed like there was some bittersweet moments there between the transition from Rotoworld to PFT.
Yeah, because I look back and what we built at Rotoworld, that was really special. Chris Wessling, who I still work with, and you guys and everyone else that's come through there, I'll probably never do something that cool. That said, I was the one who wanted to go to PFT when they came aboard. Like, I kind of came with the package, and I think you guys are the same. That's why you started to establish the run. I was all, every 3 years or so, I was always kind of looking for new challenges. So it wasn't that I was like dog in fantasy or anything. It was just like I didn't want to be doing the same thing that I was doing 3 years ago.
Right.
And so this was like a totally different way to cover the sport. And yeah, maybe you're going from like a bigger fish in a smaller pond to a smaller fish in a bigger pond, but like, that's a challenge, and like just doing something different was appealing to me. I was kind of like taxed out on doing 15 leagues a year. If it had been like the fantasy business is now, where it's like about making money in DFS, I think I would have been totally different, because I was into making money. I like playing the high stakes leagues. That was what I was into. But just like running the site and stuff, I was like, all right, let's do something new. Because fantasy writers hadn't really like tried to transition over to regular writing, and I was just like, oh, let's see if we can do that.
Right. Yeah, I was going to ask you what your impression as someone who's been in the fantasy space as long as everyone, your thoughts on the fantasy space today. Obviously, a lot's been taken over by DFS, but could you have ever envisioned this? And what are your thoughts on what the fantasy space is
Yes.
today?
Evan knows. Didn't you and
Snapdraft, yeah.
right off the top? No, I'm saying even before Twitter is happening, all we would talk about is how much bigger fantasy is going to be in 10 years.
Yeah.
I'm not just like,
well, you can see it every single year.
In 2 years, we were just like, everything is underserved. This is so big. And it was good for us, but we were just like, this is not going to stop growing for 10, 15. Like, it's so untapped. That part of it is not a surprise to me.
Yeah. I remember when I first started, there was this time period from like January through like the draft almost that we didn't do a single Raiders blurb because no one was covering the Raiders. No one was covering them season. Like they went to the Golden State Warriors beat or something. Like, and someone brought it to my attention. Like, we haven't had a Raiders blurb in like 4 months. It's like, and then 3 years later, there's 4 newspapers covering the Raiders all year round. It's just there was an explosion of coverage, which I think that it kind of went hand in hand with how fantasy impacted, because people just had a voracious appetite for all NFL news because, just because fantasy, and whether it's DFS or just season long or whatever, but fantasy was blowing up and really, really helping the sport. And I mean, everybody was playing fantasy, and you needed dynasty leagues were coming around, and in dynasty leagues to pay attention all year, Yeah. So, and now at this point, I mean, are there any fewer than 3 or 4 beat writers covering every single team? I mean, the Eagles have
way more
beat writers covering, and it wasn't always like
there weren't team sites, even those starting up ended up being an extra bonus of like, okay, we can start finding some news and content in the middle of the afternoon. It's not all news. And then Twitter happened. Like, we realized that pretty early was going to be, was going to be a game changer. But a lot of it was like like the NFL Network, I think, helped, like the combine coverage. Like off season used to be totally dead, and that started changing. You're right, and I think fantasy was like a huge part of that. I mean, the traffic Rotoworld was getting back then for how the internet was outrageous. I mean, it was one of the biggest sites on the internet. I mean, which we were all clearly underpaid, but yeah, that's why you got to go establish the run.
Yeah, exactly. The thing for me is like with real football and season long, like I didn't think there was that much money in it. And maybe I was wrong because I didn't see the numbers. But once DFS happened, that's when it was like a nuclear bomb on the industry, and then there was just so much money just flowing through the industry.
I don't think there was enough money. I mean, if you had been super aggressive about like signing up for a ton of high stakes ones, then sure. But you really had to. I did the NFFC every year, which was like a 5,000 buy-in and stuff. But there wasn't that much. Like the money wasn't in it. If DFS had happened, like that would have intrigued me so much, because I'm definitely into the making money and the numbers and everything. But I did not see that coming.
Yeah, exactly. So like I maybe would have given up if it wasn't on this fantasy thing, if it wasn't for DFS. I'm curious, Greg, do you play any fantasy anymore? Do you play DFS? Do you play season long? Are you really just following football this closely and not profiting off it? I can't imagine even like that blows my mind to even think about doing that.
Yeah, I really don't, because they have rules at the NFL. If I had gone to work for like PFT forever, I think it would have been different, or a different company. But the NFL's got rules, and like you can play fantasy for money, but like the rules they have, it's like for so little, and to me it just doesn't. It's like not worth it to if I'm not going to go big, I'm not going to do it. And I was doing some fantasy, here and there, 1 or 2 leagues with the friends and stuff. But the last few years I haven't even done it. It's just like one less thing to worry about on a Sunday. If there's not like big money at stake, I just kind of don't care.
Yeah.
Kind of explains why your fantasy takes have kind of.
I don't buy that. I honestly think if I came back into fantasy, that being out so long would help, because you're out of like the hive mind, the group think.
Oh yeah.
No, that's definitely something that just as there has become more fantasy analysis too. I mean, huge group think issue.
DFS would take some time. I mean, I would have to study and I'd have to learn all about it. I mean, I listened to your guys' show, so that's I've learned a lot about that. I've learned a lot about, you know, the lingo. I mean, Levitan's lingo is the reason, you know, you got to keep adding to it. Like every year you need some new catchphrases, but I love it. I love the dust. I love it all.
Oh God, yeah. There's so many. All the phrases. A lot of the stuff is overlap from poker, but you know, it's so good. The lingo. I agree. I want to ask you about the NFL getting into gambling and DFS. Obviously, there's sweeping legislation across states. I think in the wake of Corona, we'll see even more states move quickly to legalize sports gambling as they try to generate revenue for their states. Is the NFL changing their attitude? Have you seen it firsthand? How the NFL is changing their attitude about their stance on gambling on their game, which previously they were so adamant that, you know, we're not playing fantasy, we're not gambling. I remember Tony Romo got like almost suspended for like hosting a fantasy football conference in Texas or something.
Right. Fabiano, you know, wasn't allowed to do that conference. He was like on the little, and then it got canceled anyways, I think, because the NFL came down on it. But he was like one of the speakers or whatever, and they were like, "You can't do that." And all there was fantasy. And now that went from like 2 or 3 years later, the most powerful owners in the sports are investing in DFS, Jerry Jones and Kraft and stuff. They're like embracing the DFS content, but not enough, but they do it, you know, the last couple of years. They're a little late to that party, just like they were kind of late to fantasy in general. But like I did a show that it was like a digital show live, but they put it on the NFL Network on Saturdays and reran it a couple of times. And that was like a pick'em show. It was with Cynthia Freeland and me and Andrew Hawkins. And we're listing the line in that show, and we're saying who, you know, we're kind of skirting around it a little bit. I mean, Cynthia's definitely saying which way she leans, and I do too. But, you know, you're not quite using the lingo, but you're saying the line. Like we wrap each little game preview with like, okay, Bengals by 4.5. Like, what do we like in that game? So to me, it's totally going in that direction, and I'm excited about that. I mean, I think it's gonna keep growing in that direction at the NFL. They got to, or else they're gonna be left behind.
The thing is, it's like no, they're not fooling anybody. Like everybody knows that people are watching football to bet on it and play fantasy. Like it's just crazy that like nobody thinks that it's gonna hurt the integrity of the game by talking about it. So
like, where are you guys at for just like trying to make money off of not just your, you know, careers, but in terms of your daily, I mean, your weekly during the season, putting money down? Like, where is it between DFS and just games, or games and like other gambling, you know, picks like over under and everything else?
For me, I play like 95% DFS, and I'll have like 5% on maybe some props and stuff like that. I don't think I've talked about this on earlier pods, but I don't think there's really much of an edge to be found in like betting into really like liquid market like NFL sides. So I know there's people out there who disagree, but especially like closing lines. If you're betting on like Monday, maybe I could see it. But for me, almost only DFS. I think Silva's got some over under takes though he puts into play each week.
Yep, definitely. I bet some totals last year, and I play a lot of season long, like higher stakes season long, and a good amount of DFS every week. So it's spread around pretty good.
Look at Silva's just a big shot. See, I could not have imagined this back in the day, because Silva was in it for the love of the football. I really do. And the love of the job. Like, he loves to work. I think we all do. And he loves to get better at what he does. But he was not in it for the money. And now he's putting down like, you know, down payment on a house every weekend.
Not quite. But, no, I mean, just, you know, working more with Adam, and, you know, late in the Rotoworld run, I mean, there became a point, just, you know, that first time, that I think it was the first week that I ever played DFS on FanDuel. It was like week 1 of, I don't know, 2014 or 2013, and, you know, I bet like $50 and I won like 500. And ever since then, I wanted to be able to get down, you know, I was like, shoot, that was half my rent at the time, you know? So ever since then, I wanted to get down on every single week from that point on. And, really got more into the bigger high stakes season long leagues recently. I want to get into the props. I just have not been able to carve out time in my schedule to add anything beyond that.
No.
Yeah. Like in the high stakes FFPC leagues, you have to put a lot of time into the waiver wire because there are no trades. There are 2 waiver wire runs. And it's fiercely competitive, and you have a fab budget, so you have to really drill down on that stuff, and it takes a lot of time.
I got enough money to go on a trip to Japan, by picking up Billy Bullock for about $7 in 2006 and NFFC, riding that to the title.
All right, these guys. I wasn't going to talk about football, but these guys give me a hard time.
We don't need to.
No, I want to get your take on a couple guys that Evan and I disagree on a little bit.
Ooh.
You can be the arbitrator, Evan. And I'm not saying I don't like Calvin Ridley. I do like Calvin Ridley. I think Evan is just a smidge too high on Calvin Ridley, given that I see people comparing Calvin Ridley's situation to Chris Godwin's situation. I don't see it like that. Chris Godwin had produced at an outrageous level every chance he got. All he needed was an opportunity. Calvin Ridley's already had an opportunity, and we've seen it. It's fine, but I don't think he's capable of being a top 5 fantasy wide receiver. Evan, I think, disagrees, thinks that's well within the range of outcomes. Oof. I see where he's coming from. What do you think on Calvin Ridley this year, Greg?
How high do you gonna have him? How high do you have him right now? Just in season long.
Let me see.
He's wide receiver 9, right ahead of Hopkins.
Yeah, I do like him a lot. But I'm probably closer to Adam. I mean, he did produce like that last year once Sanu was gone and before he got hurt. And he's fun to watch, and he's in a great situation. But like my Falcons excitement is tempered by Dirk Cutter in general, and tempered by their stat. They could be in a situation where they're throwing it 45 times and there's 2 code number 1s, but man, that is hard to find. You have to be like super special, like Godwin, and be in a special like situation like Tampa was last year. So I'm probably closer to Levitan on this, but he is a badass. If Julio ever got hurt too, right. He is a badass.
That's the thing. So the Falcons led the NFL in pass attempts in Dirk Cutter's first year.
Okay.
The toughest schedule in the league this year based on opponent win totals. So that suggests that they're going to be playing from behind quite a bit, and we've already seen that they are willing to air it out a lot. I don't think that their defense is very much better at all than it was last year. They play 11 of their 15 fantasy relevant games indoors. Matt Ryan historically is better indoors. You're pulling out Austin Hooper. You're pulling out, much of Mohamed Sanu. He spent half the season with them last year. The running back situation is all in flux. And there are 2 guys that Matt Ryan has established rapport with during an offseason, entering a year where there's no offseason for practice time and preparation for Hayden Hurst. Like, you really think Hayden Hurst is going to jump in and take all the opportunity that Austin Hooper did? Likely not.
I like Hayden Hurst though because of a lot of things you're saying, and he is athletic.
I kind of do too. But and then Julio Jones is 31 and averaged his career worst in yards per target last year. So if he starts to slip a little bit, I think that Calvin Ridley can elevate, and I think that Calvin Ridley has an excellent floor. So I like the floor ceiling of Calvin Ridley, and I think that his targets they could spike. I think he had 93 in 13 games last year. I mean, I think he can get to 130 this year.
This is where and see, Levitan doesn't get into this as much, but but is he good enough? Like, so that's all. And you guys, I think that's the trick. That's a tricky thing to count on. And I get on a global level that you're going to look at everything else, like you just said, but there's also a factor of just is Ridley that guy? I'm not sure. I guess I'm in the middle, so I'm sort of ignoring that question.
I think it's fair to question, is he a true number 1 receiver?
Yeah.
But he was a first-round pick in the NFL, and he's been very productive to this point.
Looks good.
This is now his 3rd season, and I think it's just an optimal situation for him. And again, I really like the combination of the floor and the ceiling, and those are the kind of guys that I like to pick in fantasy, guys that have high floors and high ceilings.
Hurst and him are 2 sneaky oldest 3rd-year place in history.
All right, I want to ask Greg about one more guy before we get off this boring football stuff.
Yeah, We could go back.
No,
we could go back to gambling.
I really do want to ask about this guy though, because sometimes I'm afraid that Evan and I are too high on this guy. We're both extremely high on both the Bills in general this season and Josh Allen. Evan currently has Josh Allen as his QB4 in fantasy, right in the same tier as Dak and Deshaun Watson and Russell Wilson and Kyler Murray. There's like a disconnect, Greg, between like the real NFL people who think Josh Allen is like the worst ever and people who understand fantasy and how fantasy points are accumulated and what Josh Allen brings with his like street ball, rushing, full YOLO, I'll throw an interception, I don't care kind of style. So I don't know if you've thought about Josh Allen from fantasy at all. I'm sure you've thought about him in real life. Do you agree with the people that he's like a disaster in real life?
I mean, disaster's too strong. He showed last year he can be like in the right situation, okay. And they've got I love Dable, and they've got a better situation. Like he's okay. But okay is like the 24th best quarterback in the league.
Yeah.
Fantasy, this is where I'm now Evan's in my head saying me I'm past my prime. I'm not gonna doubt the master right now. I do think ultimately, and this is where we would argue sometimes, is that you don't bet on bad players too much. And so I would guess if I had to break it all down, that would be way too rich for my blood. But he's probably not that crazy.
Yeah. Okay. Before we move on to listener questions, I got to ask you about Anthony Jeselnik. I don't even know if I don't know is it okay? Are we allowed to admit that we like Anthony Jeselnik? He's like probably listen, man, if people,
why wouldn't you be able to admit that?
Because I think I'm sick. This dude is really
very,
sick.
Very dark, right?
Yeah, oh my God.
All these dudes getting like canceled in comedy. You'll never hear him getting canceled. You'll never hear anything.
Yeah, why is that? Why does he not get canceled?
Because he's not a creep, because he's a good person in real life. That if you really look at the jokes and who he's really making fun of too, it's usually not anyone like that's in a weak position. If you really look at, it's a joke for the joke. And because once he's off the stage, he's not a total D-bag getting like 15-year-old girls DMs and stuff. I mean,
right. No,
that matters more, doesn't it? Than your
for sure. But I mean, the jokes that he makes are, I think that he's probably my favorite, but they're just like so. Sometimes I would even think they're sometimes over the line. But anyways, I'm glad that we're allowed to admit that we like him. I'm glad he's your friend. People keep asking. They want me to ask you what's up with the podcast. They want me to ask you what it's like to be boys with Anthony Jeselnik. Greg broke off from fantasy and did a podcast with Anthony Jeselnik. Just give the people an update on what's going on there.
Silva's just tuning out. He's checking his phone. He
no. I remember when you told me about him back in the day, like over AOL Instant Messenger. Like, yo, I had this friend, and he's a comic, and you got to listen to some of his stuff. And I kind of never did, but then he started to really get big, and I was like, holy shit, that's Greg's buddy.
Yeah. He's coming up. I mean, he's come up. We were college best friends, so we've been friends for 20 plus years. He's the godfather to my kids. We do the Jeselnik and Rosenthal Vanity Project podcast. We will be returning. We haven't quite announced that yet. We're switching companies, but I guess your listeners will know. I've told people on Twitter, so we usually start it up in like July or August or something. So we'll be back, and he's it's crazy seeing someone that you're that close to like in that life, and just like see I don't know, from up close what happens, not just money, but just like how you get treated, and just like how the comedy business works. Because like if it wasn't for being buddies with him, I'd probably be aware of him, but it's not like I would know him that well. But like, man, comedy's he joined at the right time, kind of like we did for fantasy. Like there's so many comedians out there that you don't even know that are making millions per year.
Really?
Just crazy.
That's crazy. They always talk about how like they have to go on the road and they're working for like $100 a show and stuff like that. But I guess once you hit a tipping point,
right. It's the tipping point thing. It takes 10 years to get to that point. He's been doing it for 20 years. But once he got like the roast, he did a Donald Trump roast. I mean, that was one of the most fun nights of my life. Me and a buddy went and watched it live in New York.
Oh my God, you were there for that?
I was there for the Trump roast. And, simpler times back then. We didn't, we didn't know it was coming. But that was like after that moment, then suddenly like he could, Anthony could fill up 500 people instead of 150. And like, there's no band, there's no overhead. You're paying your manager and stuff and your agent, but you know, it's just you taking that cash.
Yeah. God, man, he really is sick, but I really do like his stuff. All right. Let's get to a few listener questions here before we let Greg go. First one comes from friend of the show, obviously, Matthew Berry. He says, Greg and I both got our start thanks to Matthew Pouliot. I demand at least one question to Greg about how on earth Pouliot did every single update for all sports for like 3 years. We already mentioned that Matthew was doing that. How was he physically doing that? And one thing that I would say is it's a little bit different back then where there wasn't really competition and there was no Twitter. Like you literally had to seek it out yourself in newspapers and stuff like that. He wasn't on Twitter 24/7. That would drive me crazy.
Yeah, but he was just on. I mean, he's an interesting dude, and like Silva, could just seemingly have an inexhaustible work ethic. I mean, you see it, Adam, I'm sure.
Mhm.
Just like he was just grinding 24 hours. Now, they weren't blurbing as much in the other sports, obviously, back then. But I don't know. I don't know how he did it, but like we have our jobs to thank for. And it set sort of the ground rules too. Like I got hired and I realized I didn't really have anyone else on football with me. And I was like initially commuting in and out of Manhattan to where the office was, which was like north of the city. And, you know, there were some times it was like, if news happened while I was on the Metro North heading back to the city, you know, it wasn't going up on Rotoworld until I got back to my apartment.
Right.
So it was just like you were on 7 days a week. I mean, for a while, for years, like I would go out on Saturdays and, you know, just kind of hope stuff wouldn't happen if I was getting loose or whatever.
Right. I remember like when I first started, Greg sent me like an RSS feed and feeder, and I had no idea what this was. And it was like his personal RSS feed. So I'd be getting stuff from like the East Village Community Center, and then there'd also be like an NFL story. I was like, what? I didn't even know what was going on. And I would write to him and be like, I think this is old. I think this is an email for you. I was like, I had no idea what was going on. But that was kind of how it worked. It was like an RSS feeder would send you the stories, then
Right.
you'd read them from there.
Yeah, every 15 minutes you'd have to get the ones that would like update a lot. But yeah, you'd signed up for all these RSS. That was sort of Twitter before Twitter, and in all these different newspapers, and just like hope you would get something, you know. And like when I would go to a coffee shop to write the magazine for like 4 hours at a time, you just like, you know, you're just hoping like things aren't happening then.
All right.
Yeah, I remember one of the biggest things that we had to catch on a daily basis a long time ago was when Schefter was at NFL Network. And I think, Greg, you were riding the train home and you were like, yo, Evan, you need to go watch NFL Network to see if Schefter says anything. You know, so I go and watch, I'm taking notes. It's like, you know, oh, this guy's in the best shape of his life. You know, the Bucks, they just hired a new special teams coordinator, and Greg's like, none of that stuff matters. You know, like you have to get we're looking for actual news. I had to figure out what actual news was. Yeah. You know, what was actually important enough to put up on the site or just to relay back to Greg. And, you know, that was one of the first things you have to learn when you're at Rotoworld, even until this day. You know, people are up there posting things about, you know, stuff that doesn't matter. And now Rotopat is the guy who has to be like, no, delete that tweet or delete that blurb because that doesn't matter.
I know. Do you guys still see bad Rotoworld blurbs and have to stop yourself from like sending something, or do you still send something?
I will definitely say something to Rotopad or to Nick. You know, if I'm like, what is that blurb all about?
Even yesterday, I saw like,
and they'll tell me who wrote it. You know,
it was just something small. It was like Josina Anderson of ESPN reports, and I was like, actually, she's not with ESPN anymore. She's just reporting on her own Twitter. I wanted to tell someone at Rotoworld, but that's so obnoxious. So I do not do that anymore.
All right. Speaking of Rotoworld, last question we're going to do today comes from Hayden Winks. He says, what narrative / storyline was the most annoying to have to blurb? For me, it was a lot of like the off-field stuff that I didn't think really mattered that much, like Spygate and Deflategate and all that bullshit. Like, didn't matter. Like, it didn't, like, tell me if the guy's playing on Sunday or not. I don't want to deal with the drama of 1,000 blurbs under Tom Brady's name about all these rumors and stuff like that. It just didn't matter to me to make him money, so I didn't care that much. But I guess for you guys, what narrative / storyline was the most annoying to have to blurb?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, that sort of stuff kind of is first bounty gate. Certainly at the NFL, the worst thing to cover was sort of like the stretch of like domestic violence stuff, you know, because I had a big hand, but that wasn't blurbing. I had a big hand in like how we were going to handle that as a news organization. Man, it's tricky. It's not fun getting like a call at midnight that Adrian Peterson got arrested because he beat his son. Like,
Right.
hey, what are you going to do about that? But back when we were actually blurbing, you know what stands out to me was Javon. This is so stupid, but Javon Walker's holdout and contract situation. Because maybe it was like the first one where I realized at the end of it, I was like, oh, all these holdouts and contract situations, they all end up the same way. And I just wasted, you know, a year and a half of my life writing 74 blurbs. And it's like, okay, well, he got his money in the end. It's like, that was the end.
Yep.
What does it matter? Like, none of that mattered. So
Right.
I think that was the first one where it hit me that like, don't sweat these as much as like you can.
Yeah. Evan, anything you really hated to blurb?
Yeah. Training camp injuries. So if you do like a training camp injury on, let's say, an offensive lineman, let's say he's an offensive lineman who's good and you know, like it does kind of matter. But then if you do that, like if you say, oh, this guy left practice, then you have to do updates to update that player. So we had to institute these rules, and you know the newbies would always break the rules. They would just post, you know, anything that they saw happen, they would just post. But you know, we had to institute these rules that you can't blurb a training camp injury unless they missed 3 practices. Now, if it was like Tom Brady, you know, then you got to blurb it. But for, you know, even like Deion Branch, like we need to see him miss at least 2 or 3 practices with this hamstring tweak. Because then again, if you blurbed it in the first place, then you had to come back, because our search engine was a really, like, our search engine is awesome. I think still at Rotoworld. It's really, really useful. But then you get the latest blurb, and hey, if it's 2 weeks later and it says that Deion Branch left with, you know, practice with a hamstring injury, and there's no update on that, everybody is gonna think that he's still hurt. You know, so you really have to be selective about those training camp.
Yeah,
injuries.
camp was
and
tricky.
that's back when
So
training camp was hard, like way harder core than it is now. So dudes were getting hurt all the time. You know, the coaches, you know, they had 2-a-days, right?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, they had 2-a-days.
Before that CBA, the 2011 CBA, I guess it was, or you know, before that CBA, yeah.
And then the coach would talk before and after both of the practices. I mean, training camp before that the CBA changes was really bad.
Did they lock you out of the Rotoworld CMS by now? I had been using like Jason Matheny. I don't know if you even remember who that is. I'd been using his name and password for like 10 years, but finally it doesn't work anymore. But I wasn't using it to do anything, you know. Right. It was just like an easier way to search than going on the website. You didn't keep having to press like, you know, next page. You could just go back and like look to things in 2015 or whatever. Yeah. But yeah, it's no longer working. I do remember once, early days, Rotoworld, when some guy broke into the system and wrote about Derek Jeter's sexual preference. And that was like a crazy, you know, 24 hours at Rotoworld trying to get this guy out of the CMS, who kept writing like nonsense tweets, like Deadspin picked it up. It was bad.
I don't remember that.
You got to get better security.
That's amazing. All right, Greg, you said it all. Tell the people where they can find you, obviously around the NFL podcast. Where can they find you on Twitter? Where else?
NFL.com, you know, Twitter, that's plenty. You know, the Jesselnick and Rosenthal Vanity Project will be back. I did want to pitch you one idea just for one you know, you can do it one time, one episode maybe during the season or something. See if your listeners, you know, are on with this. That I get to just like be in the room. I get to be in this, you know, in the Zoom or whatever you guys are doing, and just listen to your show. And I just get 3 bullshits per episode. And because listening to your show, I love it so much. So much great info, so much great lingo. But like at least 3 times every show, someone needs to call Silva and say bullshit. And make him defend it, because Levitan doesn't do it. He just lets him say whatever he's going to say. And he'll say some pretty like aggressive stuff where he's on a ledge, where he just needs someone to push back a little bit and be like, really, you really, and so I just want to sit in the room. I want to have 3 bullshits per show, and I get to press a button, and then I come in, and he's got to defend his point 3 times.
Oh, that's a fantastic idea. I don't offer that unless you're going to follow through on it.
I love your show. Your show.
Are you saying that I don't have evidence-based takes here?
No, you do, but you just like you have that role. Someone needs to argue with you sometimes. And Levitan, he'll do it a little bit. He'll change. I mean, he does an amazing job as a host, but someone's got to come back at you, and in case to present a different opinion.
He usually just like says he'll say something, and then I'll give my spiel, and he'll be like, yeah. All right, so
yeah, you can tell when he doesn't like it. You can tell when he doesn't like it, but I don't
want to doubt
you'll just say something like Josh Allen is the next, John Elway, and everyone getting on him is an idiot, and just like, okay, let's stop right there for a second.
I also don't want the shows to be like 3 hours long. You know what I mean? Like,
sure.
There's some cap there. All right, we've said it all. Gregg, can't thank you enough for being here. Can't thank you enough for giving me and Evan a shot, letting us ride your coattails all the way to where we are today. Somehow, by some miracle, look for Gregg on Twitter at Gregg Rosenthal. Look for Gregg on NFL.com, Around the NFL podcast with our old friend Chris Wessling and their whole crew. One of the most popular podcasts, I think, on the internet, as far as I can tell, at least on the sports internet. So check that out as well. If you're into real football, which people who know me know, come on, real football is for suckers. But if you're into real football, check out the Around the NFL podcast. So for Gregg, for Evan, for producer Luke, I am Adam. Good luck, everybody.